Thank you so much, Sarah. It's an honor to be here. And indeed, as you said, there is a lot of uncertainty in the decisions that we normally are called to make. So let me start by introducing myself. My background, as you said, is on geology. I started my career as a mining geologist working in one of these copper deposits that were mentioned by Anita, not in the US, but in Spain and Portugal. And later on, I moved back to the university to also to learn a bit more about management. And I have the opportunity to manage mining projects, basically at the exploration and also permitting stages in Africa, in Europe, and also in South America. Speaking now about the International Raw Materials Observatory, in fact, that's my hosting house, the place where I work as a Secretary General. The observatory is a not-for-profit organization. It was created with the European Union money back in 2017. And as the name says, it observes best practice in the raw material sector. So we look to exploration, we look to mining, we look to the processing and recycling, and basically we try to collect all these good examples of best practice, and basically we display them for the public, and we position ourselves as an honest broker. As I said, we were created by European money, and I'm talking about some research that we are now doing, also funded by the European Union. And what you see now is the call for the grant that I'll be talking about. And this was a grant basically asking, can we mine in environmentally protected areas? And as you see, this is a very tough subject, and it's explained by the fact that the European Union has basically two sources or two options, if you want, for sourcing raw materials. One is to obtain them by trade. And of course, we realize now that this is becoming more complex, not only because of the resources constraints, I mean, resource nationalism, but also because of competition. As it was mentioned by Guillaume about DRC, it's not only the European Union buyers that are there. We have Chinese buyers, we have Lebanese companies, we have companies from all over the world. Even a few weeks ago, I was realizing that in the Chilean copper sector, we have now Indian companies trying to invest in Chile. So competition for resources is becoming more global, and that explains why the European Union is trying to advance domestic mining. The problems. Well, one of the problems is that if you look to the European land surface, we realize that we have a lot of protected areas. And that happens because basically after the 80s, with the globalization, we decided to rely on resources that were on imports on one hand. On the other hand, we also decided to invest more and more on nature conservation. So some European funded programs like the LIFE program has already 40 years of experience. And in fact, many municipalities and many regions, they decided basically to try to enhance the landscape and the traditional ways of life, and that also opens the way for new businesses like tourism. So this is the case, as you have seen in this map. On the center, you have the protected areas in the Iberian Peninsula, and this is very recent. This map, it was published by the European Environmental Agency back in October 2023. And on the left-hand side, you see a map of critical raw materials occurrences. Of course, that explains the challenge that we have and the question that I made at the beginning. So can we mine in an environmentally protected area? The problems, as it's not only about land use, we can also mention the fact that in Europe, the biggest deposits were already exploited in the past. So the deposits that are left are normally small, and that's a technological challenge. But we also have a strong public opposition to mining. So we can say that Europeans are against mining, in Europe, of course, because we want to have access to raw materials. And this is happening all across Europe. So it can be in Romania, it can be in Serbia, it can be in Portugal. I believe that the Portuguese case is even more strange because you see that this image is from protest in the streets against lithium mining. And these people, they don't know, and I know that because I was in a parliament audition a couple of years ago, and many people in that auditions, they were against the opening of new lithium minings without realizing that Portugal has been, for decades, the biggest European producer of lithium. So, and they didn't believe that when I told them that we have lithium mines, and if you want to access the environmental impacts of lithium mining, we should have here the people that lives nearby these existing mines. And many people in the room were telling me, you are lying, we are not producing lithium. So there is a sort of disconnect in Europe about the need for the raw materials and the fact that basically we don't want them. So we are running this research project about extraction of critical raw materials in environmentally protected areas. I would say that what is novel in this approach, we are looking to best practice, so that explains the benchmarks. But we are also talking with populations living in environmentally protected areas. So we are reaching these people and trying to understand with them under which conditions mining might be acceptable. We have an interesting case from Estonia, for example, for a phosphate deposit that is located inside an environmental protected area. And if you ask these people if they were in favor of exploring and extracting that deposit 10 years ago, they will probably told you no way. But now they are considering that yes, that might happen under, of course, certain conditions. And one of the reasons is the geopolitical landscape that has changed. So because they don't want to rely on phosphate imports from Russia. So this is part of the approach, and I'd like to share with you some of the questions that we are discussing with the populations living in these environmental protected areas. So we are assessing 5 different countries and 5 different communities, and some of the, if you want, critical choices now, bridging to the name of this workshop that we are trying to have in these conversations is, for instance, what metals shall we consider? If you have an environmental protected area and if you want to go there for gold, should you be allowed? Of course, that raises not only the economic questions, but also the ethical ones. In my opinion, gold should be always a no way, because we don't really need gold for the energy transition. We need it for the banks and for jewelry. But despite the fact that gold is one of the metals that is receiving more money from funding for exploration, but gold should be a no way. But even in some of these critical raw materials, let me raise the case for lithium. Do you really need, or do you really believe that lithium will be key for the energy storage, let's say in 10 years from now? Because technology is changing. Probably copper will be more relevant than lithium. So this sort of questions should be raised. So what's the metal that we are looking for? And of course, what's the natural values that we are protecting in these environmental protected areas? Because in some cases, if you are trying to protect the landscape, and if the mine is invisible, for instance, if it is underground, if all the waste is managed down below, if that's possible, so in principle, we shouldn't be having as many problems. Also, another key question is the size of the mine. Do we want a big mine? And this question was raised because we realized that in some industries, and the example is coming from fish farming, that if you establish a big fish farm industry nearby a fisherman community, you probably will kill the community. On the other hand, if you establish a small, or let's say a medium-sized fish farm, it will enable the fisherman community to thrive and prosper at the same time. So the size of the mine, the resource that we are extracting, all these questions are coming into the discussion. We realize also, just to share with you some preliminary results about the narratives, this is not news, I mean, but now it's documented. So we realize that, for instance, environmental groups, they have a problem because on one hand, they want to speed up the energy transition. On the other hand, they realize that that requires, it's more material intense, so it requires more materials. And they are also saying that we should, on one hand, be more fair with the communities where these minerals are now being sourced. So they basically raise the issues of the global South extractivism, but they also don't want the minerals to be extracted in Europe. So we have all these patterns. An important one is the last one in the line, saying that we realize that some of these communities, they are saying, yes, you are coming here, you are asking questions, you are listening to us, but in the end, you don't care. Meaning that as a government, you do whatever you want. So in the end, even if we say no, our negative perspective is not considered, and you do whatever you want. And this creates, again, distrust and big problems. So part of those discussions also address industry, and we realize that industry needs new business models. What you have there is a sort of mapping of possible approaches coming from, let's say, the linear to the circular economy perspective. I very much enjoy the first one, closing resource loops, meaning that instead, and we have at least one example in Europe of a company that was basically a miner, and they started having recycling together with mining. So you can say to these populations now, I'll be opening a mine now, so relying on primary sources of the metal I'll be extracting. But if this is coupled with recycling, meaning that my source of the metals will be the mine for perhaps 10, 15 years. But once this is coupled with recycling, once I'm receiving back some of the metals that, or the products with the metal that I'm extracting back, and the recycling operation can stay here forever, meaning that we are not talking about creating jobs for 10 or 15 years and leaving. We are talking about staying with the community and supporting the community for many long years. And of course, that comes with also different levels of social benefits. We are talking about housing, we are talking about education, and so on. We have examples already, not only from the mining sector. Rolls-Royce, for instance, they moved from selling engines to leasing engines. And of course, that was coupled with the need of recovering rhenium, that was critical raw materials for the engine. And this is it. So, Sarah, I'll be looking for questions and here to support you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Vitor. A round of applause from all of us for the fabulous Vitor. Vitor, just with regards to this, and we'll leave this slide up on the screen for a few minutes in case people want to take a picture of that QR code. Vitor, often we find that these discussions can get incredibly emotional. And because they touch on things that are very, very personal to many of us. And I'm thinking back to what you were talking about there in Portugal in terms of lithium. What can we be doing to help actually take that level of engagement away from that emotional strife and actually into more constructive territory? Have you come across any tactics or ways in which we can do that to try and engage in meaningful conversation rather than in conversation that is driven by emotions?
That's very difficult. So what we realize, I mean, you have possible several approaches, but we realize that for people that have all their life investment in a specific activity, could be farming or tourism or whatever, if you are saying that you are disrupting their life, of course they are emotional. It's important to say that I do believe that the mines of the future will need to be completely invisible. So that for that the metal should add a high value in order to pay for the investment. You need to have it completely underground with no signs of, let's say, of presence. And we also probably need, in these social or economical models, we also need to consider perhaps transforming stakeholders into shareholders. again, we have examples, for instance, wind farms. In some cases, not only they rent the land for the wind generator, but they also transform the community not in a stakeholder, but in shareholders, meaning that they open the capital, and suddenly people realizes, okay, I'll be having some economic benefit altogether, and that might be helpful. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Vitor. And I think a lot of what you're saying resonates with some of what we discussed yesterday in session 1, when we're thinking about different business models in terms of the use of the land itself, which is really exciting.